This is E&P Audio, a service of Editor and Publisher Magazine since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. And hi, I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P, and today I go one-on-one with Ken Doctor. Ken Doctor, who wrote Newsonomics 10 years ago, the groundbreaking book that pretty much changed how newsrooms were performing in a very disrupted industry. But today, not only are we going to, at the end of our interview, see if his 12 prognostications of Newsonomics came true 10 years later, we're going to ask him about his brand new venture called Lookout. He's been teasing it, he's been talking about it, but he hasn't released all the details yet about his brand new concept of incubating local news on a new level. And I'll tease you with this. He's out to make it profitable. And he says people will pay for our content if we do it right. So let's get started. Here's this week's E&P Reports as I go one-on-one with Ken Doctor. Well, Ken, thank you so much for joining me today. And one of the things I first want to say is, why do you always hold back so much? You never really say how you feel. Like, for example, November 20th, I was going through Neiman, and here's your headline: by selling to America's worst newspaper owners, Michael Farrow ushers the vultures into Tribune. Now, come on, can't you come up with a better gripping headline than that? I mean, but this is your style. You're out there telling the industry what you feel, right?
I do, and it's based on my reporting and based on my now 45 years of experience in it. So I have a small but pretty loyal readership that knows that I don't pull punches, that I do the reporting, and try to tell them what is actually happening in the industry.
And there's a lot of followers there. So let's talk about it. I want to ask you about Lookout, okay, if I may. And I was reading again what you said about it. I loved, was it John Davidow? Is that how I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah.
WBUR. He said it's like you got into the cafeteria line, but only the good stuff is there. So this is your newest venture, right? And not to set the table for our dialogue, but it sounds like me, because here I am spending 20 years as a revenue producer for the industry, never published anything in my life, and then I buy E&P 4 months ago. Right. So was this one of those, blank or get off the blank moments where you said, rather than just pontificate, I'm going to put together the business model? Or what is Lookout?
It's a combination of a lot of things. I mean, it's a long arc, right, when we have careers. So I started as an entrepreneur. I started at the age of 25. I was still in a master's program at journalism school at the University of Oregon in Eugene. And started an alternative weekly. I was one of a number of people who started it. It was a collective back in 1975. And I quickly found myself out working other people who were involved there. And I was editor and publisher within a year.
Right.
And I did that for 7.5 years. So my first introduction into journalism was as an entrepreneur. And then I happened quite by chance into Night Ritter newspapers, not knowing what an august company it was, and sizable, of course, and high quality. And so that, life goes through quickly. I left Night Ritter 2005 and started doing the analyst work. And I wasn't really sure how much I would do. But in now 15 years of doing it, I have unfortunately been described by my friend Michael Wolff, who's gotten famous with his Trump writings, as a necrologist of the industry. Necrologist.
Okay. And play that on Scrabble. You're going to make some points, but go ahead.
I had to look that up when he said it, and it turned out to be, from the ancient world, the guy who stood up in the village and did the reading of the roll of the dead. And he said, you're a necrologist and you figured out a way to make money off of it. And I said, well, it's not exactly the way I see my role. But of course, in his truth telling, there's some truth there. But I have tried to describe best practices through many years of this, national and local, and from other trades.
Well, if I might interrupt, you actually posted that you have written 903,547 words
That's right.
And almost, did you get to 1 million yet? Or are we still
No,
almost?
I think we're a little short. I checked. Josh Benton is my great editor at the Neiman Lab, and I told him to tell me when I hit 1 million. I think it's going to be this spring sometime.
All right. So
It's the equivalent of 4 books.
You've written all these words about the industry. And let me be very clear. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. When I go through your stuff, there's a lot of, but you call the shots as they are. You don't, hold back. But you also see promise, do you not? I mean,
I do.
Okay. So what is Lookout? Lookout is the new best practices for a new decade, if I can put a.
Well, when I look at, it is a new decade, and especially as we look at this terrain, it is amazing what digital news has meant on a national level, and especially in the last 3 or 4 years with what we've seen happen at the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian globally, the Financial Times, which is the granddaddy of a lot of this strategy. And a lot of success niches like the information, the athletic. At the same time, we see devastation in the local press. And what I have been exhorting people to do, both through the columns and I do keynotes and I do consulting, is to apply the best practices of what we've learned. And of course, the easy answer to that is, well, we don't have the resources of the New York Times or the Washington Post.
Right.
But it's not the level of resource, it is the thinking to start out with of how you approach the customer, and especially being customer centric and using the best tools of digital age. So I decided that it is a good idea to try to actually model this on a market basis. I can talk about it globally. I can talk about it in great conceptual terms and all. But what would it mean in one market to be digital only, mobile first, high quality editorial, and importantly, Mike, this word scale,
right,
to offer enough of a product that offers enough of a value proposition. And so that's what we'll be testing with Lookout later this year in one market, and wanting to change the conversation about what is possible and what's necessary in terms of local news.
Well, you say it right here that if you don't have a press, you can devote more than the 12 to 20% average that you devote to the editorial side. You can move it up to 70. And I get that because I'm going to let you in for your secret. I'm, publishing a monthly magazine, and there's something I've learned that many publishers out there don't know.
Yeah.
But people, postage, and paper are expensive. There's no question. The problem with E&P is it's 184-year heritage. If I stop publishing that monthly magazine, I feel like I'm letting an industry down, correct me if I'm wrong, where 72% of its revenue is still coming from the print side. Isn't that what I'm hearing?
That's right.
You're advocating pull the switch, right? Shut the press down? Yes, no? And put all that money into editorial.
I think that in some markets, if you look at our best example among metros, which is the Star Tribune in Minneapolis.
Okay.
They have figured out, and John Henry in Boston, and what Patrick Sinchiang's trying to do in LA, if you have a substantial enough newsroom producing high enough quality content and a lot of it, and you have a very strong print business that you're charging a lot of money for now in circulation,
right?
Then it's not a simple matter of throwing a switch. It's knowing you're going to throw that switch at some point in this decade, most likely, at least from daily. But in many other communities, it's too late. There's not enough of a print product. And so starting fresh, and that number you said is hugely important. And I first came across it when I remember talking to Tom Slaughter at Inland, and he was saying 12, 15%. That's all it goes to editorial. And I talked to BuzzFeed. This is back, I don't know, 12 years ago or 10 years ago. And BuzzFeed said, no, 70% of our costs are editorial. And you can see, if you can put the money into what the customers are actually getting, you're going to get a better customer result.
All right. I love what you're saying. Customer-centric, it means everything. Yeah. It's not just newspapers, it's business. You look at the customer. I mean,
business 101.
Well, seriously, I mean, the best advice I ever got was the man who created Top 40. I met him in an elevator when I was a young pup. in my Mike Joseph was his name, and I just started my first radio job as a general manager of a radio station.
Yeah.
I must have been like 29, and this is a true story, and people have heard me say it. And I'm going up in this elevator with him at the Los Anatole, the NAB down in Dallas. I think and I'm going up, and I say, Mr. Joseph, you're one of my heroes. Everybody said you were stupid for playing the same records over and over again, and this format went everywhere. Can you give this young pup some advice? You know what he said to me? And it's words I live by. Find out what they want and give it to them, kid. And he walked out of the elevator. I mean, that's, so let me put you on the spot now on the editorial side. What is good news? If I were an editor today in any market, I'm talking the small towns now that have lost their newspaper, and I'm going to launch a pure play or something. What am I writing today? Tell me, is it the news they need to know or want to know? What am I doing?
It's always going to be a combination of those two.
All right.
And it was in the old days, and it is today. So in every community, you don't have one audience, you have multiple audiences. And there are some people, and people who are going to be the best customers for membership. And this is a combination of reader revenue through membership and sponsorship. But the best prospects for reader revenue are the civically involved. And there are in any community an echelon of those people who realize what they've lost as these daily newspapers have declined in coverage and in intelligence and analysis. And they want to know what's going on in the government. They want to know what's going on with local policy. In every community, we have such a national conversation, partly because of Trump, partly because of just the collapse of the daily press and the ascendance of the national press. But people care about bread and butter issues. They care about their commute. They care about housing costs and affordability and the homeless people on the streets. Healthcare, as we see from all these surveys, is a huge concern. And it's not of who am I going to support for president? It's how am I going to get good healthcare for me and my family?
Do millennials care about this, or do you need to have a home and a family before you care about the school system? I mean, I know millennials are getting older and now they have their kids, but I'm saying,
certainly people in terms of school systems, sure, people care most when they have kids.
Right.
You are a millennial and you're trying to find a place to live and you are priced out of the market, you care. That also gets into how stuff gets developed. And as you see an empty lot there and people are making decisions on it. So you have the YIMBY movement, for instance here, where a yes in my backyard, that's fueled by young people who say, I don't care what you old people want of like keeping your neighborhoods exactly the way they were. We want more housing to come up. And so that brings people into planning issues and that kind of thing. At the same time, there are staples of food and arts and entertainment and family events that continue to be, this is what people do in their lives. And so the combination, and when I talk about scale, Mike, that's really important. The reason to do this is to help build local community betterment, community education, what journalism has always done. But journalism's always been popular to help people enjoy and navigate their lives. Mm-hmm. And you have to have a big enough news organization, really a new local news institution is what I'm thinking, that both satisfies people on very basic things like what new restaurants are open and how good are they, to the biggest problems of education and health in the community.
You started at an alternative. They're going away. I mean, like in Profusion. Why? Because that content that came out, people craved, right? Where do I go for a beer? Where's the band doing this? What's going on in my community? Where is that content now? Is that just happening in blogs? What?
It's very splintered, like much of other local content. There's some on Facebook. There's some on Instagram.
Right.
People will find it here and there. Back 20 years ago, 25 years ago now, at Knight Ridder, we had a project called Just Go, which was an entertainment database. I
remember that. I do.
And there was Sidewalk and Digital Cities. Mm-hmm. It's amazing today in 2020, as we all travel, and people watching this and us from city to city, there is no single place to go to find out what's going on.
That's exactly right.
So us, that potential is still, if you told me 20 years ago it'd be wide open in 2020, that potential is wide open.
So an aggregator who does it right and gives the content that people crave can still make it as a local journalist, correct? I mean, this is what it's.
I think what's core to it is original work, also curation, but not just aggregation. There's not enough to aggregate. It has to be original work that is coming from people who are in the community, who have knowledge of that and are out there talking to people every day. That's the old-fashioned part of this formula. And then doing it digital only and using the power of the phone is what's new.
You mean the mobile device when you say the phone, right? Or using the phone as an information gathering tool? I'm sorry, sir. What were you?
No, I mean, I mean the phone, the way we all use phone to access news today. I
Exactly.
mean, 80% of our usage, yeah.
Right. Well, that's what you say. I mean, when you summed it up, correct? And I'm looking here now, a city embracing mobile experience. There's your first word. This is your definition of Lookout, unless I'm wrong, delivering knowledgeable topical reporting paired with national content partnerships.
Yeah.
And then meet our audience with where they are. And you say, is audio hot? I mean, do you believe in voice the way everybody's saying it's going to grow? Will I be asking Siri or Alexa where I want to get a beer tonight? Is that the future?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in terms of how we live our lives, voice activation, voice recognition will clearly be the way we find most of our stuff by the end of the decade, I think.
All right.
And so for us, podcasting, we're gonna end up doing a 5-day-a-week podcast, 15, 20 minutes a day, start out with. That's not mainly revenue, because there's some good, as you know, there's good sponsorship there, but it's not a lot of revenue. What that is discovery. Early on, I wrote about Michael Barbaro and the Daily at the New York Times, and there was a great deal of skepticism. And I could hear in that they were able to convey the depth and personality of the Times journalism in a way they could never do in print. And that is now working for them. And full circle, the ads you hear on there are hardly third-party ads. They're about subscribing to the New York Times, because the power of that reporter's voice saying, you want to know how to support me? Subscribe, is so powerful.
All right, so we're 10 years after Newsonomics.
Newsonomics.
There you go. The word you made up that everybody read 10 years ago. I mean, it was, and where you set the stage for where we were heading and what it takes to do news properly. Now it's Lookout. If I was, okay, we know that there's a lot of small market publishers right now struggling to survive, watching us right now. And you know change is hard, right?
Yeah, for all of us, yes.
What's that old joke? How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is one, but it really has to want to change in the first place, right?
Yeah,
so you've got a publisher who's going to say, I don't have any resources. I'm writing half the content. I'm paying one woman to edit. I've got a bunch of people, that are just supplying me stories. Can they seek out Lookout and move a model even in these smallest markets that desperately need their news coverage today? Whereas Lookout just for the larger metro cities. What is that?
So my intention is that I hope we create a model that does help them. Now, what we have to do, as any startup does, is get one done right.
Okay.
That's the total focus, to get the first market up, get it right. Got a lot of theories about how to make this business work, how to make the journalism work. I think most of them will be right, but there'll be mistakes.
Okay.
If I'm right about this, and that an immersive mobile experience of quality actually produces the revenue to support it and be profitable, that can help change the conversation in our industry about what's possible.
So you're going to are you incubating now somewhere? Are you?
Yeah.
You are. You're not going to talk about where you're doing it, or
not yet. But soon you'll be among. Excuse me. You'll be among the first to know. But I'm not saying yet.
Yeah, our editor-in-chief, New Yang, would like to really be on the top.
I know.
She keeps wanting me to ask you where it is and how's it going, but we'll hold that back because you're now in the
going well. But yeah, but in terms of the other markets, I mean, seriously, what we want to do is prove it out and see that this theory and most of the theory is right. Then the application, in terms of the size of the markets, what I'm focused on mainly is markets that are sub-metro at this point. So the idea is a lot of the principles that I wrote about there at the Neiman Lab apply definitely to metro markets, but metro markets are big. They're complex in terms of live, work, play kinds of issues. And so communities that are more discrete, basically between 200,000 and a million in population, and I think there's 150 of them in
Yes,
the
there
country,
are. Right.
are places that people have more of a singular identity, that they can be approached therefore by a local medium in a lot easier way. So we're going to test it out in one of those markets, and we're going to see how well that works. And essentially, both on the editorial side and the business side, what we have already in evolution is a playbook. Okay, are we doing this right? Do we have the platform right? Are we doing the voice and the personality of the coverage as well as the deep journalism right? Are we right in terms of the way we're selling membership and the way we're selling sponsorship? And so I would hope out of all those lessons, then we can talk to other people and see both it could be other people who are already doing startups at a lower level. It could be new investors. It could be, and I've been contacted by a number of smaller daily publishers who are strong in print, have a strong print legacy and brand, but have not figured out what they want to do digitally. That is because of the cost question of print. There's a lot of questions there, but I think once we can prove this out, that opens the doors to lots of different conversations.
Well, you just let something out of the bag, if I may, and I'm not trying to parse your words.
Yeah.
You said pay for membership. In other words, your belief that people will pay.
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
you ain't giving it away in your model. People will
Right.
pay.
Right.
Not metered. You either pay or you don't get. Is that your philosophy?
So we'll have access control system. We're gonna be quite flexible with it. I'm looking at again. I've learned so much from my first talks with the FT were in 2009,
Okay.
and
Wow, yeah.
so much from them. So, for instance, having site-wide free opening for a month or 3 months at the beginning, where you have sponsors actually pay for open access, is one way to encourage discovery of a brand new product. And that is something both the FT and the New York Times did when they launched their subscription programs.
That's true. The freemium model.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, at the beginning it was just free, and then you could access it. So there are a lot of ways to do access control without saying you get 1, 2, or 3 articles and you're done. And we're going to have a flexible customer data platform behind what we're doing, so that we can test those ideas.
And in those markets you discuss with those market sizes, you're competing.
Yeah.
You've got a newspaper still in place, whether you're working with them or not, we don't know, and likely 4 news outlets on television, 3 or 4. And then you likely have public radio locally as well. So these are all competitors for those critical eyeballs, ears. It doesn't worry you if you lock down the content? This is what everybody worries about. That competitor will steal that person.
So in each market, the number of TV and public radio outlets varies. In terms of public radio, it's interesting. If you look at public radio in the top 20 markets, say, and I've covered that in my work, they're doing a lot of news, and they're doing a lot of free news, to your point. You get below the top 20 markets, they're doing very little news. They have a public mission, but they're essentially NPR pass-throughs. So they're not really competitors for news. The number of TV stations and commercial TV stations varies. And with each of these, there are both opportunities in terms of partnership, as well as what you clearly point out as competition.
But all right, so it's out there. The Lookout model, the one thing we can say now, will be it'll be paid content. That's where you may invite them in first to sample it.
Yeah.
But you believe, and this is important, that people will take. I don't know if you saw the podcast we did last week, but I think you've heard of Tap Into in New Jersey. I got Mike Shapiro, who runs those 80 websites with 1 million page views a month. He actually said never charge for content. He was screaming, keep it wide open and monetize it with ads. You don't see that as the future right now.
It's insufficient to providing enough money to pay enough journalists to cover a city or community well.
Okay.
That's the key to it. And so it is a combination of membership and sponsorship, and we'll see what that split is over time. And there are a lot of innovative ways I'll talk about soon, I hope, in terms of beyond a lockdown paywall and a single price subscription for everybody.
Will this be a for-profit thing or a non-profit thing?
So it's a for-profit public benefit corporation. And that's been an important structure, as an idea that I borrowed from Jake Shapiro, who has been a major innovator in public radio.
Right.
The idea is that a for-profit company can raise capital, obviously. It can also be part of a local business community. And when you're selling advertising, you know this better than anybody listening. You want to be part of the local business community.
Definitely.
You want to be, I don't think, a nonprofit that's asking for help. You want to produce results. That's what advertising does.
And so if I may pontificate, and I'm not going to point fingers, but when you have a local newspaper bought out by a large company that takes the publisher out of the picture.
Exactly. It's been ridiculous.
You lose the guy on the school board, or on the United Way board. You lose the guy. You lose the guy or girl that is the face of that business community.
Absolutely.
And that is critical, in my opinion. I mean,
it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical. And I think what you're getting to, and this is the other reason that we're going to succeed, is that we're producing not just a high quality and I think higher quality news and information product, but our platform, and I'll get back to the public benefit company in a minute, but this is how it connects. It's a community betterment platform. And this goes back to my time in Knight Ridder in the 90s, and we were doing public journalism forums with Jay Rosen from NYU. The purpose of a newspaper is, of course, to produce high quality news and information that people can use. But why do we have it in the United States? We have it because we believe in self-governance. We're losing sight of that. And the way you have self-governance is you know what's going on with the county board, the city council, the school board, the water board. And newspapers did that even if their coverage was often boring.
Well, you said it yourself. What we need to do is activate the democracy. And a vibrant, involved, fair, nonpartisan local press is essential. I couldn't agree with you more. When I read these words, I think everybody, without a local press, we lose one of the pillars of our society. Don't you agree?
Well, it's absolutely true. And connecting the dots that, again, better, this is also the essence of business and being successful in business. When you talk about all the chains have taken publishers out of local communities and off of that United Way board, people want to see a medium that doesn't tell them what to do. It tells them the background. It gives them the analysis. In a way, I would hope that I do for my readers in the newspaper world. It gives them the straight dope of what's going on and says, we have a big homelessness problem. Lookout's not going to tell the community, you should do this about homelessness. What Lookout is going to do is do the deep reporting around the issue, bring in best practice from other areas, and convene public forums. And the idea is we're saying we can solve this problem as citizens. Now that is almost radical in 2020, but that's the community betterment platform, and that ties to public benefit of the reason I'm doing this at this other arc of my entrepreneurial career is not to make a lot of money. The idea of this is mission driven, but for profit is the best way to do it. And the last piece on that, Mike, interestingly, is because there is much rage in this world of saying, the future of journalism should be nonprofit. If it's nonprofit and it's 501c3, you cannot endorse candidates or take stands on ballot measures. And people look to local media for that kind of endorsements.
Which was going to be my next question. Will you have a clear demarcation between opinion and news?
Absolutely.
Because that's the thing that's driving me crazy on cable right now.
Yeah.
I mean, all three. I'm not going to. They don't say now this is opinion. Here's the fact. It's all mished and moshed together. You will demarket like newspapers do today. This is news and this is opinion. That's part of the lookout philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. How we do the labeling. I mean, there's a lot in there in terms of craft concern, as there has been even back when I was in the newsroom 20 years ago, of what's analysis, what's interpretation, what's opinion. I'm, as an editor who's been an editor for many decades, I'm pretty clear on that. We will find the right ways to communicate that to readers.
But what I love, and this is what I think, when will we hear more about this? I'm going to ask you for a date. The spring, the fall, when are we going to get the real?
I'm married. I can't give you a date.
All right.
Sorry.
All right. But
it'll be soon. No, it'll be soon. It'll be the spring.
But I love what you're saying. We're going to do more than just report the news of the community. We are going to be part of that community.
We're going to advocate for being a better community.
And which is what we should be doing.
We have to. That's the origins of our country, with all the good and bad things that have happened. And we redress the things that go wrong. And I'm not a particular follower of the Pope usually. Pope Francis said it so well
when he's not slapping Rick. Go ahead.
A few years ago, and he talked about the malaise that was hurting the Western world, and that really described it. And because this is not a problem of the U.S., it's not. Canada is actually worse off than we are in newspapers. Western Europe, our friends in democracy, our allies, same problems, different trajectory. Latin America. The malaise is that people we all come from a great legacy of self-governance and belief in freedom, self-governance, and that's the way that we do things in America. And yet people feel that they cannot solve problems, whether it's transportation or it's housing or homelessness or better education or this healthcare debate, which is going to go on apparently for decades. We can solve these problems. And again, we're not going to be prescriptive in saying these are the solutions, or we say we can damn well solve these problems on a local level. And what's the role of the press? Old-fashioned as it could be, hold the feet to the fire of the people who are elected to make those decisions and ensure community involvement. It's that basic.
This is very exciting. Now everybody's going to really be waiting for the report on your incubation.
Well, we'll do the best we can. I'll share as much as I can as soon as I can, and I'm eager to share more as we go along too. It's going to be once it is public, it's going to be a fairly open book. So I hope it's a good read.
I am excited. 10 years after Newsonomics. Now, I only have about 10 more minutes of your valuable time. So I want to have a little exercise.
Okay.
In Newsonomics, you made 12 trend predictions, all right?
That's right.
10 years ago. I'm going to read the trend prediction. Tell me if you were right or wrong 10 years later. I'm going to put Ken Doctor on the spot right now.
Fun.
Here was number one. In the age of Darwinian content, you are your own editor. Yes or no today?
Absolutely true.
Okay.
We can get to it. We can get to anything, and we do.
All right. B, the digital dozen will dominate.
It turned out much more true than I thought. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, BBC, the major networks are still there. And even though we had the rise of Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, and Vox and others, they went up, they kind of came down again. And it is the legacies that have been smart enough to transition to digital that are ascendant.
Okay. Local, remap, and reload. That was your third.
I would say that's pretty much a work in progress, as we've discussed about the lookout in the wider landscape.
Well, the problem was when the book came out in 2010, right?
Right.
So we were in the recession. We had just started we were in the height of the doom and gloom era. Yeah. And that's when newspapers had lost two of the three pillars of classifieds, right? Let's go back in time. They lost homes and they lost jobs, and they never came back. To
That's right.
this day, there's still classified managers, I hope you're not mad at me for saying this, that thinks these verticals are coming back. And yeah, we'll have those 40% margins again. By the way, I didn't ask you that. When you say
Yeah.
profitable, what is a profitable margin now? What is a publisher, what can they live on? What do you see as that profit margin in Lookout?
But it depends on what that publisher wants. Like with Lookout, my goal is to get it to profitability, to make it very robust and secure, and to expand on the model. So
Okay.
that's my goal with it. And every owner and every family has their own.
Yeah, but I think that a 13% profit, I think Delta would kill for that, right? Walmart.
That would be pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but there's some hometown papers.
Well, you're right, and there's still a hangover of people say like, well, I remember when we had 35% at Gannett or 18% at Knight Ridder, and those days are
Those days are gone. We got to accept the fact. Okay, I don't want to take too much of your time. The old news world is gone. Get over it. Well, that's pretty much.
It takes people a long time to get over the past.
All right,
yeah, it's happening. It's happening.
Back to Newsonomics predictions from 10 years ago of Mr. Ken Doctor, mastering the fine art of using other people's content. In other words, you predicted the content curation craze, correct?
Yeah.
And it's here to stay.
Yeah, and it continues to change. We talked about UGC, user-generated content. Now we talk about, you look at the use of Facebook posts and Twitter, and bringing in the right third-party content. And certainly, and it gets back to that question you said from your disc jockey friend. What is it people want? Well, sometimes they want your own stuff, and sometimes they want other people's stuff. If you can bring it to them and package it right, they're happy.
And they have that one place to go for it, then you can monetize it. I agree.
That's what's huge.
It's a pro-am world. What did that mean in our? That's the one. What do you mean?
I think that one worked out differently than I thought. That the pro part of it clearly is true. That if you remember back a decade ago, people were saying, "Well, you don't really need journalists anymore. You'll just have people sent out in the community. They'll cover meetings and be essentially amateurs, or user-generated content would replace journalists." I've always understood the value of journalists in terms of what we do to sift and make judgments on news. And so I always thought the pro part of it would be there. I thought there would be more meaning that you'd have more occasional contributors than there have been. Mm-hmm. And I think actually there are. You'll see that in Lookout. We'll still play with that idea, but the pro part of it and the loss of the pro part of it has been huge.
All right. Reporters become bloggers.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. You look at the way that we write, and I guess my own work is a very good indication of that. What is it? It's very deeply reported stuff, but I'm writing it very directly, and I'm not writing it in the old way we wrote newspaper stories.
All right. Your prediction 10 years ago, itch the niche. The bundling together of the sections of a newspaper delivered in a daily package is no longer necessary.
Niches is just amazing. As we look at the verticalization, topicalization of information, especially through digital. Great example in New York Times bundling philosophy. What are they doing? They're selling you food separately now through cooking. They're going to sell you parenting separately. We all have our own topical interests, these niche interests, which are vertical. Exactly. And then the horizontal is the brand over it. That's what the newspaper was. And I think in a lot of ways, what we need to recreate in the 2020s in a digital form, in a mainly mobile form, is that very strong verticals. And I think of these people who are doing the reporting as correspondents, who are deeply knowledgeable, and you as a reader know them. And then there's a brand that's horizontal above them that connects them together. So I think that's very true about niches.
Well, it's the world. When I was a kid, a newspaper had an 80% market share, right? 80% of it. But when I was a kid, there was a TV show that had an 80% market share called, those of you under 40, excuse me, the Ed Sullivan Show. I doubt if you ever heard. But keep in mind, this 80 share audience, why? Because they would show an opera singer followed by a puppet, followed by a stoned out rock and roll band. You can't find media like there's no such thing as mass media, right? It's all niche media. That's where we are today. All right, so that was a good one. We only have a few more to go. These, remember, if you just tuned in, Ken's predictions from 10 years ago in Newsonomics. Now we're 10 years later. Apply the 10% rule. I love this one because that definitely proved out. Don't you agree?
I do. We can go into detail, but yeah, there's a lot there of how you manage business. Yeah.
But basically, look for where it is and work on what's working. I mean, all right, let's move on. Media and marketers find new ways to mix and match. There's no question about that.
That has completely transformed over this decade.
Two more to go. I feel like I'm doing Johnny Carson. Wait a second. There's another word. He was a guy on TV late at night. Don't worry about it. I'll hold this up to him. Okay. Two more to go. For journalist jobs, it's back to the future. Now, this is important because are the days of having a full-time job with a salary and benefits working for the same newspaper or the same media company for the rest of your life gone? Or is any job like that gone in our society?
Well, we can see in the wider society, the wider society has changed greatly. Now we have the reaction against it, especially in California where I am, where the state legislature has taken on the gig economy and said we don't get this is not going to work. With repercussions for newspaper companies, for instance. But clearly, journalists have, in terms of their opportunities in the profession, have been greatly hurt over this time. And the journalism schools are full. They're learning lots of different skills. And I think that even though, like with Lookout, I'm creating full-time positions, and I think this is important in terms of the kinds of coverage I want in the community. Clearly, journalists themselves have to be more flexible in terms of their skills and in terms of working for multiple people, especially early in their career.
Well, I found it fascinating when I managed a TV station years ago.
Yeah.
That a reporter would do one story a day. I'd have to send out a reporter and a shooter and come up and generate. When I managed a radio station, I had each of my reporters would do 6 or 7 stories a day. I mean, they were phoning, they were taping, they were, I think we also have to just, in my humble opinion, as a publisher, we got to rethink output. Does that make sense? And work hard to create as much content.
But it's not just volume. Volume clearly is important, but what is important, we know, in the digital news business is engagement. So what kind of content it can be? I mean, you got the New York Times with 1,700 people in the newsroom now, and bylines that have, stories that have 4 or 5 bylines. Those stories carry weight and sell digital subscriptions. At the same time, what to watch tonight and how quickly they're now producing that, or the Express team at the Washington Post, both things are important: volume and depth.
All right. So finally, I have the final. There's going back to Carmack, right?
What was it?
Remember the final prediction in Newsonomics? I love this one. Mind the gaps. Through many historical systematic factors, brands, unions are now rapidly smashed by economic flat world we're in. In other words, it's a changing world as far as economics, correct?
We have to change faster. I mean, that's one of the things that has been sad about this business. And I love this business. I've been part of it for 4.5 decades at this point. If you look at what the problem has been, clearly revenue and the revenue decline, everybody can point to that. Deeper than that is culture and the resistance to change. Rank and file people in newsrooms, in the ad sales departments, but also in management. They were too slow to change as the digital news world was fast encroaching. So if you look at video, let's go back to search, video, social, audio. Traditional newspaper people and magazine people and broadcast people have been slow to adapt.
Totally.
I live right across from Silicon Valley. Yes, a lot of brilliant people there, although their depiction in Silicon Valley, the HBO show, is pretty right on in terms of how one-dimensional people are. They're brilliant in a certain way, but they're not smarter than people who are always good community newspaper people. They're just different. They think different. And what has concerned me over the years is the slowness to change of an industry that is at the core of American democracy.
Um, were you at the NAA when Guy Kawasaki was speaking to us when he was back at Apple? And he said,
I don't remember that one.
he said, you guys think too much at Apple. We ship it, then we fix it.
Yeah.
Are you kind of advocating that sometimes it's better just to ready, shoot, aim, and get into the place and then fix it as you go? Is that
Well, yes and no. I mean, journalism is based on one thing that the tech people don't understand, as we see from our friends at Facebook and the disaster of the 2016 election.
Of course.
Is accuracy is a cornerstone of the business. And so you have to get the accuracy right. That's not negotiable. In terms of moving faster in newsrooms and faster with business processes, certainly, and there's a lot to learn there, but both things are true.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Doctor, a visionary, and obviously nailed a lot of things 10 years ago. We're going to keep a lookout for Lookout. Can I say that? I know that's going to.
That's fine, yes.
I'm going to ask you for an exclusive. If I'm saying make sure we know about it.
I'm taking a semi-exclusive.
All right, because you're going to release it, obviously. But it sounds very exciting, a brand new model coming, and I really appreciate your valuable time, Ken.
Oh, yeah. It's great talk.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Good talk soon.